Hi, everyone. Ed Bixby here from the Global Green Burial Alliance, and this is Spotlight Now. Today, I'd like to introduce you to Cecily Callahan. She is the founder and executive director of Ash Tree Green Burial. Cecily grew up in Clovis, California, and after her grandmother died in 2008, she finally saw what went into a traditional burial. Displeased with the process and environmental impact of traditional burial, she searched for something better. What she discovered was green burial. She is a wife and a mother to a 3-year-old and an avid reader. We also have Stacey Dwyer. Stacey is the cemetery and funeral home liaison for Ash Tree Green Burial. In 2016, Stacey began part-time work in green funeral product sales across the nation, and in 2022, she decided to pursue a career in the funeral business exclusively. Stacey is currently working full-time in Fresno County, helping her community during difficult times of loss and supporting them as they celebrate life, legacy, and healing. So welcome, Cecily and Stacey.
Thank you.
Yeah, glad to be here.
It's great. Well, we're really appreciative that you're here. So why don't we introduce and start learning a little more about Ash Tree Green Burial and why your organization was formed.
Sure. So, like you were talking about, in 2008, my grandma passed. However, at the time I was only 19. So while I discovered green burial, I didn't really feel like I had a whole lot of agency to get anything done, or I didn't know where to start at all. And then fast forward, I'm 30. I just had my son, and I realized, oh, if it's going to happen, it's now or never. So that's when I really kind of just dug in, did some research, started contacting people. And then a few years later, I finally said, you know what, I'm going to start a nonprofit. And that's when I opened Ash Tree Green Burial with the intention of opening a green burial cemetery in Fresno County. So we're in California, we're surrounded by green burial cemeteries in Northern California, Southern California, but right here we don't really have anything. And in order to be green, we want to keep it local. So my intention was to open one here.
That's great. And where do you currently stand? Like, have you found a particular property that you might want to develop? And if so,
yeah.
What steps are you taking, to see that through?
Yeah, so I have one that is potentially in the works. So I actually work for the Unitarian Universalist Church of Fresno. And on the campus of the church, originally the church was an orange orchard. And there was a smaller house in the front. And then they developed the church on the land. And then there is still some of the orange orchard behind the main sanctuary. So while it is, a nice orchard, it's a little bit too much for the church to keep up with. So my idea was to convert part or the entire orange orchard to a green burial cemetery. So I am currently in the process of figuring out zoning and maybe some different laws I'm having to navigate to finally make that a green burial cemetery. So thankfully, most of the congregation is on board with the idea of doing this. So it looks like, if the city or whoever I need to go through approves it, then we can get it going there.
And that sounds like, oh, sorry, Stacey.
Oh, no, sorry. I was just going to piggyback on that a little bit and say that really what we're looking for now are some loopholes to kind of get around some of the bureaucracy inside Fresno City and Fresno County, because there is a lot of pushback for change in the funeral industry, as you're probably aware. It changes very, very slowly, and new ideas tend to get really big pushback. And the first answer is almost always no. So now that we're over that no hump, we can start really looking at ways to kind of make this happen for folks, because there is a want and a need for it. So.
Absolutely. And the squeaky wheel gets the grease. So, unfortunately, people tend to be afraid of what they don't understand or what they know. But what I can say to you and I can say to this audience is that you are on the right path. Knowing a little bit about zoning and things like that throughout the country itself, the predominant areas that are legally zoned for burial typically are agricultural land. Now, of course, we all understand that over time, agricultural land changes, and sometimes they rezone areas. But if the original purpose of the property that you currently have still remains the same, then you should be a grandfathered non-conforming use. So if they've told you no, now we go back and we gently say, okay, well, but this is how we understand it to be. And I think you might get a little more with sugar than vinegar, but that's
Sure.
great. I mean, have you encountered any difficulties legally from the community when it comes to opening or bringing that eco-friendly funeral option, meaning that they've said no, but has there been any other pushback, or is it just the initial, can we do it, and they don't really understand yet?
No, yeah, I haven't encountered anything else legally at this point. Thankfully, where the church is, on the other side, on one side of the property, it's called co-housing, and a lot of the people in co-housing are also for green burial. So I don't foresee any issue with them saying, we don't want this right next door to us. And then on the other side of the church is a Buddhist church, or Buddhist temple, I'm sorry. And so we also don't foresee them saying, we have any issue with it either. So, and then right behind it is a ponding basin, and I did call the Fresno Flood Control District, and they said we have no issue with it whatsoever. So,
Yeah.
Right. No, to me, it sounds like the perfect use. And also, I think that they have to understand that that this is certainly to better the community itself.
right.
So I think that that's important. I think that you guys are following the right path. It sounds to me like you've got a good chance of making this happen. If the stars were to align and everything started to move forward, when would you anticipate possibly, or what would your goal of a timeline be? Let's say if tomorrow they said, you know what, guys, you're right, you can do this. What would your hopes be as to when you could maybe open up the property?
So when I started, I gave myself the goal of 10 years, and that was about 5 years ago. So I'm hoping I'm within the next 5 years to see it up and running to its full potential. And I know Stacey has some other goals as well.
Yeah, and I think too, that once you get over that hump of getting some people in the community actually involved with wanting this service, and then talking to their friends and families about it, about their wishes for when the time comes that they pass away, that's really when you start to get that organic following for it. And then when people are asking for such things, you get interest from other companies, other churches, other people who really can dive into this idea of a greener funeral option. And I wanted to also address the fact that you mentioned agriculture, right? So here in Fresno, we are a huge agricultural community. And two of the biggest cemeteries here, one that I used to actually work at, more than 50% of their property is being rented out to agriculture right now, right? And that's how a lot of cemeteries do it. And broaching that conversation with even existing cemeteries of, hey, right now you're growing corn. How do you feel about green funeral, and bringing this to the forefront? And usually it's when people have been doing it the same thing for a long time, right? For the past 50, 60 years, we've been doing it this way. It's organized. You have the vaults, you have all these things that stabilize the earth. And we don't want to suddenly have to hand dig and all of these other things. And the prospect of we won't make as much money. I think that's the biggest thing for the corporate cemeteries for sure. The pushback on the green funeral, simplicity is not something that makes their shareholders happy. So it's kind of this multifaceted, not necessarily legality pushback or timing pushback, but just I think the misinformation that you can't sustain a business if you switch everything to green. And that's simply not the case. Just because there's other ways that people and younger folks want to have memorial services. They want to honor their loved ones in unique and wonderful ways, but all of that money doesn't have to go to a vault, for example. So sorry to interrupt.
Well, absolutely. No, Stacey, that's exactly correct. I mean, the problem is that the industry they don't understand how to financially benefit by serving their families through this. And the way I look at it, and what I say to people all the time when I tell them the benefits of doing this, is that you want to be ahead of the curve, not behind it. The consumer is now in the driver's seat of this vehicle. If you don't accept new practices, you will be left behind. But ultimately, there are certainly ways to benefit financially by charging for different types of services. you know, and understanding that you won't have to spend as much money on the maintenance portion, because ultimately, if you and I were to look at a traditional cemetery and how they're operated, it's a recipe to eventually crumble. It will not, you know, sustain forever. And this is a way to sustain forever. So I totally understand where you're coming from. It's difficult to make them understand until they have a place like yours open and operating and they can experience it for themselves. That's
Yeah.
what will change their perspective.
For
So
sure. And I think it's really funny too, because this is something that has happened in the very recent future. You know, cremation, for example, in the 70s and 80s was not popularly adopted by a lot of big cemetery and funeral purveyors because they were like, oh, this is a fad. They thought it was a fad. Well, now we're looking at, you know, 80+% of people are choosing cremation. And so in the 90s and 2000s, they really scrambled to build more crematoriums because they're like, oh, we were wrong. This is a thing that people want. So, yeah.
well, you know what the message can be, and the message I always deliver. We are turning the tide on cremation. We're bringing funeral service back to the funeral home. That's what's, you know, full body burial. So no, I think you guys, you know, you got a little bit of heavy lifting, but I think if you can get going, you will change that, you know, turn the tide. And with that being said, Cecily and Stacey, I know, you know, you guys do a bit with death education. You know, what has the community's response been to the prospect of these options potentially being made available to them soon? Like, how are you being received when you know, speak to people about what you want to do?
People love it. I really haven't had anyone, you know, tell me this is a bad idea or this is not good. Some, you know, the most I've gotten is, well, I've already made my plans, and then they move on. But for the most part, no, people love it and people want it and people are ready. You know, I had actually somebody wrote an article for the Fresno Beeb. This was actually Christmas Eve of last year, and I got a pretty good influx of people to the website from that. And people love to ask, will you be ready before I die? And I said, well, when you plan on doing that? So people want it for sure. You know.
Yeah. And for
That's
me too,
great.
that the education portion is hugely important because I am you know, above and beyond being a funeral director and, you know, helping families at the time of need currently, I really encourage pre-planning. And so if more people are pre-planning wanting services like this, it really sends a message to your family and your community. But also education in, you know, people will say like, well, I already told my family I want to be made into a tree. It's like, well, there's there's a little bit more that goes into the planning of that than just telling your family. Also, it's a little bit more complicated than that, but it brings people into the conversation, at least if they say, I want to be a tree. We've got the thing for you.
Absolutely. And you know, you really are right when you say that pre-planning is, you know, you want to funeral service and stuff really for the living, meaning that you want to take care of your loved ones that you leave behind. So if you really truly want something, you should consider taking care of it while you're living. That way, when the time comes, your family can then be immersed in the celebration of a life that was lived and not be scrambling. And, you know, the funeral industry itself, funeral directors, I mean, they're such an integral part of what we do. Believe me, we have so many wonderful ones all the time. All of them are wonderful in their own way. They just have to start to understand the benefits of what we do. And believe me, once they do, they embrace it fully. So I'm never worried about, you know, convincing the funeral industry that this is the right thing. I just want them to experience it so they understand that it is. I think that's what's most important. And certainly, if I had $1 for every person that came through my cemeteries and said, this is a beautiful place. I love coming here and walking the dog, but I've already got my own funeral arrangements. And then 18 months, 3 years, 5 years later, you know what? I love this place. This is where I want to be. And they throw all the rest out the window. So don't worry, that happens. It changes their minds. It really, truly does. So I would love to, you know, if I'm passing through Fresno in the future, I would love to be able to stop by if you guys were open and see what you were doing. So
Yeah.
the fun part of what we do, you know, and this will be for both of you, it would be, you know, what in this question, I'd like you to envision what the future looks like. So for you, Cecily, we'll start with you. You know, what is your vision for ash tree green burial? Let's say, well, I know we usually say 5 to 10 years, but you're 5 years in. So let's say in 5 years, where would you like to be?
I for sure would like to have the cemetery up and running and looking into the future of, possibly opening a whole funeral home that has aquamation available and terramation and yeah, just incorporating all of the green options. And Stacey, you want to talk about your goal for?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. So I am very deep dive invested in terramation. So that's like really my ultimate goal, along with Cecily. I think it's really important to be able to offer all of the traditional services in a greener way. So I love the fact that we can have these conversations about, the green cemetery where whole body burial, you're really putting your family together and really giving that ceremony back to the family. That's really the way I look at, traditional burial in general, and then making it green. It really, to me, it just fills my heart with a lot of joy because I know that people want that experience. And then the folks who are like, you know what, I don't believe in or want burial for myself. Well, aquamation is a great option. And you can also, because what you get back from that process is greener and better for the environment, you can also have a final resting place in that cemetery if you so choose. And then terramation, of course, is you can do everything. You can have some of your soil left at the cemetery. You can have some of your soil sent to all of your friends and family. You can donate your soil. It's just a really beautiful, awesome process that can be this multifaceted place for people to go who are wanting, so many different things, but still staying within that kind of traditional feeling. Because, when people are hit with that loss, what I find most often is folks revert back to what's normal, what's comfortable, what their family has been doing. Like, it's not the time to suddenly be this rogue warrior for green, right? Because in family, maybe they're judging you. They're saying, why are you going to do it different? Dad didn't do it like that. But this pre-planning notion and also, showing how traditional it can be for them that's what I foresee in the future. And I hope that it really comes to pass. I know we have a lot of work to do, but I think it's closer than ever, honestly. I mean, 2016, when I was working with Coeo, which unfortunately is now no longer in business, so much pushback. Folks were just like, nobody wants that. Nobody thinks that that's great. It's green, it's weird, it's where are you going to put them? People just like wig down about it. And now 10 years later, it's, people who ordinarily would be like, well, I want, the traditional open casket embalming, all of that, are saying, actually, you know what? Maybe you're right. Maybe there is a better way to do this while still giving my family that traditional feeling and service and way to grieve and move forward the way we always have done. So sorry, I went on a little tangent there, but
No, that's all right. No, that's the passion that comes out. No, that's what we
yeah.
want to hear and what we want to see. I mean, it's a beautiful vision from both of you, and there's no doubt in my mind that you will see it through. It will happen. And you're absolutely right when it comes to greener options. We serve all options, because this is America and people have the right of choice. But at the end of the day, when it comes to the final internment aspect, let's say if you're aquamated or if it's terramation and you plant a tree or a natural burial, what would the environmental impact be in this world if every single person, no matter what they did, it planted a tree in memory of their loved one? We would be living in a different world, and that's very simple, something very simple. And to be memorialized that way is beautiful. So I mean, we here at the Global Green Burial Alliance really appreciate what you're trying to do. We encourage anyone watching this, to please reach out, and we'll provide some contact information to Cecily and Stacey, in the Fresno area. Please support it, come out, because listen, at the end of the day, it comes down to the fact that it's the power of the people. Yeah. And I've sat in many rooms and I've been the only voice, but it's necessary. Because if that voice is not there, no one will hear what you have to say. So we really appreciate, your time, ladies. If viewers would like to learn more, visit ashtreegreenburial.org. And anyone in the Fresno or California or anywhere else for that matter, if you can support these ladies and help bring natural burial options to Fresno County, it would be wonderful. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yes, and thank you for all that you do.
Yes.
The more community organizations and institutes that can get together and really educate and promote this idea of a greener future for those that we leave behind is amazing. So thank you so much for the opportunity.
Appreciate it.
Thank you very much.